On the day that was supposed to be the happiest of my life, the man I had promised to marry, Christopher Hill, chose instead to leap into the dark ocean with his mistress, Jenna West. They said it was to prove his undying love for her, and the world believed they both vanished forever beneath the waves. 10 years passed like a storm, dragging me across broken glass, and in that time, I carried the Hill Group holdings on my back. Fought tooth and nail for every inch of survival, rebuilt what others tried to tear apart, and learned to stand taller than any man who thought I was disposable. I thought the ghost of that wedding had long been buried. Yet tonight, as the chandeliers glittered above the Bellagio Hotel on the Strip, the past burst through the door and sat down at my table. The moment I saw them, my blood turned to ice. Christopher stood at the threshold, thinner than I remembered, his skin worn and sallow, his once sharp jaw now shadowed by years of hardship. His shirt was wrinkled, faded plaid, so out of place in the gilded private dining room, and clinging to his arm, her smile as sweet as venom, was Jenna West, the very woman who once raised her chin to tell me that real love cannot be measured by marriage licenses or society's approval. They were supposed to be gone forever, washed away by the sea. Yet here they were, shamelessly returned, flaunting their survival and the life they had built without me. It was supposed to be a celebration. Chloe Hill, my younger sister-in-law, had just turned 20. I booked the Bellagio's most luxurious room, set the table with crystal and roses, arranged everything so Mrs. Margaret Hill could feel proud in front of the family. We had barely lifted our glasses when chaos erupted in the hallway. Shouts echoed through the thick carpeted corridors, security trying to restrain intruders. Before I could rise, the door burst open. The room froze. Mrs. Hill's hand trembled beside me, her breath catching in her throat. For a heartbeat, I thought she might faint, but then her eyes focused, and all color drained from her face. She saw her son, the one she had mourned for a decade, standing alive before her. Christopher's eyes filled with tears as he dropped to his knees. His voice broke like a boy's. "Mom, I'm back. It's me, your son." The air grew heavy with sobs. Mrs. Hill lurched forward, embracing him, her body shaking as if she were clutching a miracle. For her, it was resurrection. For me, it was betrayal all over again. I sat still, spine straight, lips curling into a faint smile that cut sharper than any blade. My pulse hammered in my ears, yet my face betrayed nothing. I had faced shareholders who threatened to devour me alive, bankers who called me weak, rivals who waited to tear me down. I learned long ago that silence could be more devastating than any scream, so I watched. I watched my mother-in-law cry, watched my so-called husband kneel, watched the woman he chose over me hover with demure humility, like an actress bowing before applause. Then came the children, 3 of them each dressed in worn, ill-fitting clothes, their shoes scuffed, their collars frayed. Christopher pulled them forward proudly, his voice thick with emotion. "These are your grandchildren, Mom. Say hello," the little ones piped up in unison, sweetly calling her grandma. Mrs. Hill's grief melted instantly into joy. Her wrinkled face brightened, tears turning into a smile so radiant it nearly broke my composure. She clutched them close, as though they were treasures, and in that moment I realized what Christopher had come back for. Not redemption, not reconciliation. He returned to lay claim, to parade his mistress and their children as heirs, to force his way back into the family and into the empire I built with my own blood. Jenna West lowered her eyes, feigning shyness, her voice soft. "Mrs. Hill, I've been with Christopher through every hardship. We survived because of each other. These children are proof of our love." Then she glanced at me, her lips curling ever so slightly, and with calculated innocence she said, "Sister, I wonder what gift you've prepared for me." The audacity made my chest burn, yet I still did not rise. I knew better than to let anger show. Anger was weakness, control was power. The door opened again, and Chloe Hill breathed in her laughter sharp as glass, until she caught sight of the ragged children crowding the table. her nose wrinkled with disgust. "What are these street kids doing here? Move them out of the way!" She flicked her skirt as though brushing dirt from her path. Typical Chloe. Spoiled, arrogant, shielded from the storms that forged me. She had been only 10 when Christopher threw away his life. To her, he was little more than a ghostly rumor, not the brother who abandoned an empire. But her cruelty tonight only made the contrast sharper. My calm silence against her venom. My strength against their chaos. Mrs. Hill's face darkened, her voice stern. For the first time all evening, "Chloe, mind your words. That is your brother." Chloe froze, mouth snapping shut, but the disdain in her eyes lingered. She looked at the children again as though they were stray dogs. I almost laughed. Even the Hills could not disguise the truth. Christopher had returned not as a triumphant heir, but as a beggar at the table I now commanded. As I sat there, the weight of 10 years pressed against my chest. 10 years since Christopher left me at the altar. 10 years since he chose Jenna, a secretary intoxicated by forbidden love, over the family legacy over me. Our marriage had been arranged since childhood, 2 powerful families bound together in what should have been unshakable union. Everyone thought we were inevitable childhood sweethearts destined to rule the Strip. Yet on the very day he was meant to say, "I do," he left behind nothing but a suicide note and the wreckage of 2 families. His father collapsed from rage and grief, half his body paralyzed. Investors circled like sharks, and my own father, Robert Evans, withdrew his support, disgusted by the scandal. Jan Group, no Hill Group, was bleeding, its empire collapsing, and I, barely 26, had to choose: let it all crumble or seize it with both hands. I chose the latter. I fought until my nails broke and my voice was hoarse. I traded sleep for boardrooms, friends, for contracts, youth for power. I turned Hill Group into a fortress, every stone laid by my will. Now, as Christopher returned from the shadows with Jenna on his arm and 3 children at his side, I realized he thought the doors would still be open for him. That family would forgive that business, would forget that love would erase betrayal. How naive. He might have survived the sea, but he had not survived me. Christopher's father, Richard Hill, had always been a man of iron, stubborn, and merciless when it came to protecting the family name. The day he discovered Christopher's affair with his secretary, Jenna West, he didn't hesitate. He fired her on the spot, blacklisted her from every respectable firm in Nevada, and made sure her name was smeared so badly she couldn't find work even outside the state. Everyone believed that Christopher would eventually submit to his destiny, accept the marriage contract with me, and step dutifully into the role of heir. But instead of obedience, he left me humiliation. On our wedding day, with the guests waiting and the champagne chilled, he left behind nothing but a suicide note and vanished into the sea with Jenna. The ceremony collapsed into chaos. What should have been vows and blessings turned into screams and disbelief. Richard Hill, already weakened by years of pressure, read his son's note and collapsed with a stroke right there in front of the altar. Within hours, he was rushed into emergency care, and as he fought for his life in a hospital bed, the vultures circled. The board of directors of Hill Group Holdings demanded answers. Family members whispered about disgrace and incompetence. The Hill empire trembled like a building struck at its foundation. Mrs. Margaret Hill had never been prepared for such storms. Born into privilege, pampered through her life, she had no experience in navigating corporate battles or family betrayals. Her hands shook, her voice faltered, and she couldn't provide the leadership everyone demanded. And my father, Robert Evans, who had once promised his unwavering support, looked at the scandal, at the humiliation, and turned his back. His anger was cold, merciless. He walked away from the Hill family that day, leaving them to rot. His departure was not only personal, it was political. Without Evans' capital behind them, Hill Group became fresh meat tossed into shark-infested waters. I could have left too. I could have walked away and let the Hill family crumble into dust. Let Christopher's betrayal drag them all to ruin. But I saw Daniel, only 18, just accepted into medical school. His future shattered before it could begin. I saw Chloe only 10 too young to understand, but old enough to feel the cold stares of society. I could not abandon them, not when the storm threatened to destroy them entirely. Great families do not tolerate weakness, and that year I was only 26, recently returned from graduate studies abroad, with 3 years of work at Evans Capital behind me. I had skills, but not yet the power to lift a corporation on my own. Fortune, cruel as it was, offered a twisted kind of mercy. Richard Hill survived his stroke, but he would never walk again. Half his body paralyzed. His voice slurred. He had to surrender the empire he built. I went to my father, begged him for help. He sneered, but he saw opportunity. Under Evans Capital's backing, and with Richard's reluctant blessing, I seized the reins of Hill Group Holdings. I moved fast, cutting deals like a surgeon with a scalpel, replacing weak managers with my own loyal people, slashing divisions that bled money, restructuring departments that were bloated and corrupt. The company that looked dazzling from the outside had been rotten within for years, and I knew if I hesitated even a moment, it would collapse entirely. So I stopped hesitating. I lived in the office, eating takeout at midnight, closing my eyes for stolen hours on the leather couch before dawn. I clawed Hill Group back from the grave. And somehow, through sheer will, I restored its name, put it back on the map, and held it steady against competitors who wanted nothing more than to see me fail. 10 years of relentless sacrifice. 10 years of bearing the girl who once dreamed of love and weddings and children. 10 years of turning myself into a woman forged from steel. And now in the very room where I tried to celebrate Chloe's birthday, Christopher Hill waltzed back from the dead, with the mistress who had ruined us, and 3 children who carried his name. His explanation was pathetic. His voice cracked as he spoke, his hand clutching Jenna's like a lifeline. Mom, back then we were rescued by a fishing boat. They took us to a remote island. Communication was impossible. Jenna was pregnant. I had no choice but to stay to protect her. When our daughter was born and turned 1, only then did I learn what had happened back home. I was ashamed. I couldn't face you. He bowed his head, his shoulders trembling as though he carried unbearable guilt. But all I saw was cowardice. Margaret Hill wept again, her tears endless. You're home now. That's all that matters. You've suffered so much, my son. She clasped his hand to her chest, blind to the wreckage he had left behind, blind to the empire I had rebuilt in his absence. To her, his return was enough. To me, it was an insult carved into my flesh. Daniel, however, was not swayed. His voice cut through the sobs. If you weren't dead, then why didn't you come home? Why wait 10 years? His eyes burned with something between rage and betrayal. He had spent a decade watching me sacrifice everything for the family his brother abandoned. He would not accept this cheap excuse. Christopher faltered, his lips parting, but no words coming. Jenna stepped in, her soft voice, a dagger wrapped in silk. Daniel, the children are grown now. They deserve to know their family, to honor their grandmother. Whatever happened before, we're here now. That should matter. She lifted her chin just slightly, her eyes flicking towards me with that same smugness she carried 10 years ago, the certainty that she had won. Because she had Christopher's heart. I no longer had the stomach for their play acting. The birthday I had carefully prepared for Chloe was ruined beyond repair. The air was heavy with their sobs, their excuses, their shameless claims. I stood my chair scraping against the polished floor. The box containing Chloe's birthday gift sat unopened before me. I pushed it gently across the table toward her. My voice was calm, stripped of warmth. Happy birthday. May this be useful at the company. Then I walked out, leaving behind the farce of reunion, leaving them to wallow in the mess they had made. As I stepped out of the Bellagio's glittering lobby and walked toward my car, heels clicking against the marble floor, a voice called after me. I didn't even have to turn around to know who it was. Jenna West. 10 years ago, she had already perfected that tone, soft on the surface, sharpened underneath. Lauren, please wait a moment. I stopped not because I wanted to, but because I refused to let her think I was afraid. Slowly I turned, and there she was, the woman who once plunged my wedding into scandal and shame. 10 years ago, she had stood before me with defiance blazing in her eyes, declaring that the unloved wife was the real intruder, that the mistress who captured a man's heart was the rightful partner. Tonight she wore the same look, though time had carved its marks deep into her face. Her children hovered at her side, their clothes mismatched and worn. They looked out of place against the shimmer of the strip, out of place against her desperate attempt at purity. Jenna still clung to that image of innocence dressed in a white dress nearly identical to the one she had flaunted a decade earlier. Heavy powder caked her face, but it could not disguise the freckles that had bloomed across her cheeks or the lines that dug around her mouth and eyes. Yet one thing had not changed: her arrogance. It blazed in her gaze, unrepentant, unshaken, as if the world owed her victory, simply because Christopher had chosen her. "Lauren," she said, her voice lifting with pride. "Back then you looked down on me. You thought I wasn't worthy. But look where we are now." Christopher stayed by my side for 10 years. He jumped into the ocean for me without hesitation. "We have 3 children together. You lost." She smiled, raising her chin as if she were wearing a crown, invisible to everyone but herself. "Marriage licenses don't prove love. I am the woman he truly wanted, not you." A laugh rose in my throat, cold and merciless. Did she really believe hardship was glory? Did she think suffering with a weak man was triumph? My lips curved and my words slipped out sharp and deliberate. "Jenna, people fight over many things in this world. Even scraps, even filth, even dog's waste can be fought over. You won that. But I am not waste. I am a person." Her face drained of color, fury flashing in her eyes. For a second she looked like she might claw at me, but she steadied herself quickly. Forcing a smile twisted with scorn. "Lauren, everything you have today, isn't it because of the Hill family, the company, the wealth, the position you hold? All of it exists because of Christopher's name. Now that he and I have returned the house, the business, the assets, all of it should be ours again. Don't fool yourself. You never belonged in that seat." Her laughter was bitter, mocking. "What doesn't belong to you will never last. You can never truly be Mrs. Hill. And you know what, women shouldn't be too ambitious. Our true role is to nurture children, to stand behind our men. That is our real purpose." Her words rang with so much smugness, it was almost absurd. She truly believed she was walking back into a throne I had been keeping warm for her. She pictured me cast aside disgrace while she swept into the Hill estate with her children in tow. 10 years had changed many things, but not the delusion in her mind. I leaned closer, my voice low and calm, almost gentle, but my words struck like a whip. "Jenna, the Hill family no longer carries that name. 10 years ago, Christopher thought faking his death would free him from responsibility, that he could disappear into some fantasy of eternal love. 10 years later, he's just as naive. He believes the doors of Hill Group will swing wide open for him, but they won't. The empire you think belongs to you has already been rebuilt, and it is no longer his. And if you're wise, you'll find a good plastic surgeon before you bother dreaming of being Mrs. Hill. Because by the time you sit in that chair, some young, beautiful secretary will toss you right back out." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Rage twisted her face, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of a response. I turned away. There was no reason to continue the conversation. She had already lost the war, even if she hadn't realized it yet. I returned to my office where I had cleared my schedule to host Chloe's birthday. The phone buzzed with messages from her, each one sharper than the last. She complained about Christopher barging in, about Jenna's shamelessness, about how their mother blinded by tears, and Joy scolded her for being cruel to the children. Chloe raged through her words, but beneath it I heard the cry of a girl who felt betrayed by the very people who should have protected her. I told her to enjoy her night, to let the party end on her own terms, and to head back to campus early. By 5 o'clock, as the strip glittered outside my window, my phone rang again. My father. His voice was calm, but it carried a weight I knew too well. "Lauren, come home for dinner." It had been years since I had sat at that table, years since Evan's mansion felt like anything but a battlefield. Our relationship had withered to silence, business discussions replacing any semblance of family. The idea of dinner together was almost foreign. Still I went. The mansion stood tall on the edge of Henderson lights, glowing warm against the Nevada desert dusk. Inside, the family was already gathered. My stepmother Cynthia swept toward me with an eagerness that dripped of performance. "Lauren, you're home. Come, let me take your bag. Tonight I cooked myself all your favorite dishes." Her smile was bright, too bright, her hands fluttering as if to erase years of coldness with a single gesture. I gave a polite nod, my voice flat. "Thank you." Neither warm nor cold, simply indifferent. I had no energy for charades. Since the day I had taken control of Hill Group, my stepmother Cynthia had transformed into an entirely different person. Once she had been sharp-tongued, cold, and openly hostile, but now she performed kindness with meticulous precision. She smiled every time she saw me, fussed over small details, asked after my health, and pretended that her hands had never pushed me down when I was at my weakest. It was all for show, and she knew that I knew, yet she played her part anyway. At her side sat Emily Evans, my half-sister. She barely lifted her eyes to meet mine, offering nothing more than a passing glance before lowering them again. She never said much, which somehow made her presence heavier, like a shadow that lingered no matter how much light filled the room. Dinner was surprisingly pleasant at first. Every dish was tailored to my taste, from the braised short ribs to the light soup I favored on late nights at the office. Someone had clearly gone out of their way to research my preferences, a performance meant to soften me. I ate in silence, aware of the performance, but unwilling to give them the satisfaction of acknowledgement. It wasn't until the meal was halfway through that my father finally spoke. "I heard Christopher Hill has returned." I placed my chopsticks carefully on the edge of the porcelain plate and gave a small nod. His voice held no surprise, no shock, no emotion at all. He had either been prepared for this or had expected it all along. "Lauren," he continued, his tone, "even your marriage with Christopher Hill was annulled, wasn't it?" "Yes," I answered immediately, my voice crisp and decisive. "It ended the day he left me at the altar and threw himself into the ocean with Jenna West. In the eyes of the law, I remain a widow. No matter if he lives now, that marriage was dissolved long ago." My father said nothing more, only lowered his eyes to his bowl and sipped his soup slowly, as though we were discussing the weather. The air around the table thickened, pressing down on everyone's shoulders. Even the clink of silverware seemed louder than usual. My younger brother, the only son born of my father. And Cynthia did not appear for dinner at all. I wasn't surprised. Instead, a servant had brought food to his room, as though his absence could erase the tension that clung to the air. The silence stretched until my father spoke again, his words slicing through the stillness. "Hill Group should bear the Hill name again." I raised my eyes and studied his face. There was no trace of jest or casual suggestion. He was deadly serious. For a moment, I simply looked at him, then laughter rose from my chest. Soft at first, then edged with bitterness. He didn't understand. Or worse, he understood perfectly and simply didn't care. 10 years ago, when Christopher betrayed me and the Hill Empire nearly collapsed, I had knelt on the cold marble floors of Evan's mansion begging for help. I offered up the last piece of my mother's inheritance land that she had treasured in exchange for his backing. He agreed, not because he believed in me, but because he saw profit. He had never once trusted me to carry the weight of a corporation as large as Hill Group. To him, I was just a pawn, a temporary shield against disaster, an investment to be leveraged until it no longer served him. From the very first day I stepped into Hill Group, he had laced the company with his own loyalists, planted eyes and ears in every corner, made sure every decision I signed was monitored. Every major project was steered toward Evans' capital, profits drained to serve his empire, rather than the one I was trying to save. For years, I suffocated under the pressure, forced to fight battles on both sides, one against competitors and the other against my own blood. I endured for 3 years. 3 long years of biting back my rage, of swallowing humiliation, of working day and night to strengthen my own position in silence. In his eyes, I was a puppet, a daughter who would dance when he pulled the strings. But when I finally grew strong enough, when the company's foundation no longer trembled beneath me, I cut every string he had attached. One by one, I severed every project tied to Evan's capital. I stripped away their influence from our contracts, erased their names from our accounts, and forced his loyalists to stand helpless as I signed document after document, slamming the door on their greed. I remember clearly the day he stormed into my office, red-faced, demanding to know how I dared betray him. I looked him in the eye and repeated the very words he once flung at me. "Business is war, father. That was your lesson to me." Years ago, when my maternal grandfather's business collapsed, my mother had begged him to intervene to help her family survive. He had turned his back cold and unyielding and told her that the marketplace was a battlefield and the weak had no place in it. Now I reminded him of his own creed, and the fury in his eyes was almost worth the years of sacrifice. Now, as he sat across from me in the mansion's grand dining room, he dared to lecture me about names and legacies, about the Hill family's right to what I had fought tooth and nail to preserve. My eyes narrowed, my lips twisted into a smile that was neither warm nor amused. "Father, tell me, which Hill should the company belong to? Daniel, who gave me his shares long ago, because he has no interest in business, only medicine? Chloe, who has never once attended a board meeting or understood the weight of a balance sheet? Or Christopher, the coward who abandoned us all 10 years ago, only to reappear now with a mistress and children in tow?" The only remaining option was Christopher, and we both knew it. My father's silence was an admission. He wanted to place the empire I had rebuilt into the hands of the very man who had nearly destroyed it. He lifted his gaze at last, his expression hard, unyielding. "If you and Christopher are no longer bound by marriage, then perhaps Emily should be the one to approach him. Perhaps she can do what you will not." I turned to my half-sister. Emily's face was smooth and passive. She didn't flinch, didn't protest, didn't agree. She simply sat there composed as though none of this concerned her. That had always been her way. She lived like a ghost within this house, silent but watchful, biding her time. We were never close. From the day my mother died and Cynthia stepped into this mansion, I had been pushed aside, made invisible. Emily grew into beauty, inheriting her mother's grace, and at 24 she carried herself with the elegance of someone who had been groomed for admiration. She had her mother's features, delicate and striking, and the same silence that made people underestimate her. But I had lived long enough in this house to know that silence often concealed ambition sharper than words. Rumor had it that Emily Evans had recently stepped into the entertainment industry, her path smoothed by the family's wealth and connections. Success came easily when doors opened for you without knocking, but even her beauty and charm could not erase the inconvenient truth. Christopher Hill was 14 years older than she was, already tied to Jenna West and burdened with 3 children. The absurdity of pairing her with him made me laugh bitterly. I narrowed my eyes and said, my voice dripping with sarcasm, "Father, she is your daughter. Do you truly intend to throw her into such a farce?" Robert Evans remained silent, his expression blank. "But Cynthia?" My stepmother leaned forward with that polished smile she wore like armor. "Lauren, I know you're upset, but Christopher has returned and he hasn't come back alone. He brought a woman and 3 children. Naturally, Hill Group will belong to him again. Emily is young, beautiful, and fresh. If she marries him, the family legacy will remain in our hands. And you, after all these years at Hill Group, haven't you already benefited enough? You should learn when to be satisfied." Her tone was gentle, almost motherly, but the venom beneath it was clear. I turned my gaze on Emily. She sat there as though none of this concerned her. Her face composed, her eyes steady, not a flicker of protest or agreement. She wore detachment like a second skin, as if to deny her own complicity. One by one, they cloaked their ambitions with false concern for me. They called it generosity, but in truth, it was greed. They did not understand that for 10 years, I had been the one carrying Hill Group, that I had already become the largest shareholder, the architect of every vital project, the commander of every decisive battle. My voice had long been the only one that mattered in the boardroom. Christopher's bloodline could not erase what I had carved with sweat and blood. I rose from my chair, slowly meeting my father's eyes with a smile that did not reach my own. Father, you relied on my mother to build your empire, then relied on me to hold it together with a marriage of convenience. Now you would use Emily to tether Christopher. You are 60 years old. Is it not time to fight for something yourself instead of sacrificing every woman in this family? The words struck like a whip. Cynthia's face flushed, her breath quickened, and she shot up from her seat, hands trembling with rage. How dare you speak like that? I am the one who gave your father a son. I secured this family's future. I cast her a cold glance. And what throne has your son inherited? What crown has he been promised? Giving birth does not make you powerful. Climbing into a man's bed and producing children, that is your only skill. Do not lecture me on how to be a stepmother to my sister. My tone was calm, almost conversational, but each word was a blade. Be careful, Cynthia. In this house, women who outlive their usefulness are discarded without mercy. One day your husband may sell you off, and you won't even realize it until you are already gone. Her face turned pale as porcelain, the color draining so quickly I thought she might faint. She shouted, her voice cracking, "You insolent girl. I am the one who gave him a son." "You have no right," I interrupted smoothly, my eyes hard. "And what of it? Has your son inherited the throne of Nevada? Has he been named heir to Evans' capital? Outside of seducing a married man and bearing his child, what exactly have you contributed?" My lips curled with disdain. "Do not presume to teach Emily how to be a daughter. Do not dare to instruct me on family duty." The tension in the dining room grew unbearable. Cynthia's chest heaved, her fists clenched at her sides. She opened her mouth again, but before she could speak, footsteps echoed from the staircase. The door to the lower level creaked open, and Emily entered. Her smile was flawless, poised as if she were stepping onto a stage, but her eyes betrayed her. Beneath the calm facade was a storm of fear and calculation. "Emily," Cynthia cried, rushing to her daughter, "tell me this isn't true. Tell me you don't stand with her." Emily's lips parted, and for the first time her voice carried steel. "Mother, I stand with Lauren." The crack of a slap shattered the air. Cynthia's hand struck Emily's cheek so hard the sound reverberated against the walls. Emily's face turned the skin instantly swelling, but she did not cry out. She only lifted her head again, her smile faint, her eyes glinting with something dangerous. "Father, I gave Lauren all the evidence of your dealings with Christopher. Every betrayal, every scheme." Cynthia gasped, her fury erupting as she seized Emily by the collar. "Ungrateful child. How dare you betray us? Have we ever treated you poorly? Have we ever denied you anything?" Emily's voice was steady, cold as winter. "All my life I have lived according to your demands. Piano lessons, dance etiquette. All the things you forced on me I endured. You wanted me to outshine Lauren and I complied. When she married, I thought I would finally be free, but you pushed me again into entertainment, into deals, into becoming nothing more than a flower on display. And now you want to use me to barter with Christopher. Enough." Cynthia staggered back as if struck, her eyes wide with disbelief. "All this anger over something so small, everything I did was for your brother." Emily's smile disappeared, her eyes turning icy. "Yes, always for him. But why never for me? Why was I never enough? Why did I never deserve your trust? Why could I never make a choice for myself? Why was my worth always measured against a man?" The room fell silent. No one moved. Even Robert Evans, who had once commanded boardrooms with a flick of his wrist, looked stunned. Emily's words rang through the dining room like a verdict echoing in the hollow spaces of every heart present. Emily's words still hung in the air, her voice trembling with years of suppressed pain, when my father slammed his fist against the table. His composure cracked, his fury spilling into the room like fire. "Enough," he roared, his face flushed red. I will not listen to this insolence any longer. Emily wiped her tears, straightened her back, and turned away from him. She refused to meet his eyes again, walking out of the circle of his authority without another word. My father's teeth ground together, his voice dropping into a cold hiss as he looked back at me. What do you want, Lauren? Name your price. I leaned back in my chair, calm, as if we were discussing business over coffee. My tone was even unhurried, but every word carried the weight of finality. There are charges waiting, Father. Embezzlement, bribery, fraud, insider trading. Every illegal deal you struck with Christopher Hill is recorded. The sum reaches into the billions. Do you think you and Christopher can escape those consequences? His face blanched. For the first time, fear flickered across his features. I continued unrelenting. Go abroad, disappear, never return, transfer every share of Evan's capital to Emily and me. That is your only option. His breath quickened, ragged, his eyes wide with disbelief. You're dreaming, he spat, trembling with rage. But I remained unmoved, my expression unreadable. Father, I said softly, almost with pity, this is the greatest mercy you will ever receive from me. Accept it before I change my mind. He tried to steady himself, clutching the edge of the table as if it could anchor him. His voice cracked a mixture of fury and desperation. Ungrateful child, are you not afraid I'll drag you down with me? I will not surrender so easily. I allowed a thin smile to touch my lips, my eyes sharp as knives. Fish may die, Father, but the net will remain intact. You know that as well as I do. The truth of it made him tremble. His body sagged back into the chair, drained of strength. Silence weighed heavy on the room, for so long that I wondered if he had lost consciousness. Finally, his voice rasped, hoarse and broken. You are nothing like your mother. Of course not, I answered. Her kindness only brought her pain. If I had inherited her patience, her obedience, I would already be dead. I refused to die her death. I waved my hand dismissively, tired of his posturing. Enough meaningless words. By tomorrow, the papers must be signed. Leave this country and never come back. Those are the only terms. He tried one last time, clinging to dignity that had long since slipped through his fingers. Lauren, I can surrender the shares, but I cannot leave my home. Your stepmother and I will retire quietly in the countryside. We won't interfere with you again. Isn't that enough? I cut him off, my eyes boring into his. Do you believe your own lies, Father? Because I don't. Even you don't. You would find your way back to power in a heartbeat if I allowed it. You cannot change what you are. His eyes lined with the weight of time, filled with a plea he had never shown me before. His voice trembled, almost begging. Lauren, can you not forgive me just once? A cold laugh escaped me. My words came slowly, each one deliberate. Tell me, Father, if you had succeeded in taking Hill Group from me, would you have spared me? Would you have forgiven me? He lowered his head. Silence answered me louder than any confession. I pressed on, my tone sharp. Of course not. You would have drained every drop of my worth, then cast me aside like a broken tool. That is what you have always done. So why should I give you mercy you never gave me? I stood my decision already final. Leave this country forever or rot in prison. Those are your only paths. I reached for my younger brother, barely 10, who had been watching from the shadows with wide, frightened eyes. I pulled him to my side gently but firmly. He will stay with me. He is an Evans, yes, but he will not be taken away from the family's true heir. He deserves a chance to grow without your poison. Cynthia lunged, her scream piercing the air. No, he is my son. He will not be raised by you. She tried to tear him from my arms, but I moved quickly, pulling him behind me. I didn't spare her a glance. She was no longer worth even that. Instead, I turned to Emily. Your mother is yours to handle now. Decide for yourself what she deserves. My brother clung to me, and I could feel his heartbeat pounding like a trapped bird. They would not dare harm me while he was in my care. Not tonight. I shifted my gaze to the other side of the room, to the hills. Christopher's face was pale, sweat gathering at his temples. His voice cracked as he blurted out, I'll leave the country. Please just don't destroy everything." I couldn't help it. I laughed. The sound was sharp, cutting through the air. "Who said you had the right to leave? Did you really think you had that privilege? With the Hill family, I will show no mercy." Christopher's expression collapsed, his pride shredded. Chloe wept openly. Margaret begged through sobs, but I remained unshaken. Their pleas slid off me like water against steel. The first lesson of business had been seared into me long ago. Kindness toward your enemies is a knife you plunge into your own chest. The only path is to eliminate them, root and branch. Power and profit are the only currencies that endure. And even when handed the worst cards, I could still play them into triumph. By the time the night ended, everything was decided. I returned to Hill Group as its undisputed master. When the results of the government's massive infrastructure bid were announced, my company Mintech had secured the contract. Christopher's influence had already been gutted, his loyalists dismantled, one by one. I had embedded my people in his circle years ago, and every move he made was already in my hands. The board could no longer question me. My position was unassailable. Those who had sided with Christopher were purged, the dead weight cut away. A complete restructuring followed, swift and merciless, and for the first time, the company stood purified. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. Years of patience of waiting for the perfect strike had brought me here. I climbed to the top, not by chance, but by calculation, by sacrifice, by fire. In my office on the 22nd floor, the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the glass, I poured myself a glass of wine. I raised it toward the empty room, to the woman who had survived, to the warrior who had emerged from betrayal and blood. This drink was for me. I had earned it. I deserved it. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next videos.